What's the most disturbing secret you know about someone that would ruin their life if exposed, but you stay silent, pretending you don't know? Story 1. Over 10 years ago, I worked at a video game store. One of our regular customers had a life-changing accident. He and his family were involved in a severe car crash. Tragically, his wife didn't survive, and he was left permanently paralyzed. Their children survived and eventually recovered. He had no idea that his wife had been cheating on him with several of his best friends, and no one ever told him. Even now, he still speaks fondly of her, completely unaware of what was really going on. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. My ex's Muslim father asked to meet me immediately after she secretly brought me to her country. He liked me, but he assumed I was Muslim as well, since my ex had told me to claim I had recently converted. On the way to my hotel room, my ex turned off the tracking on her phone, which caused a lot of chaos. This prompted the meeting with her father right afterward to ensure their 24-year-old daughter was safe, as she wasn't allowed to go anywhere after work without their knowledge. I lost my V-card about 2 hours before meeting her father, and it was a wild experience. On the way to the hotel, she broke every speed limit while holding my dong. It was the first time we had ever met, and I had just flown to the US to see her. If I had contacted him and told him that I hadn't even washed before meeting him, I'm pretty sure my ex-life would have been ruined immediately. One of the many private photos she had sent of herself could have done the same, but I don't have any of those left. I'm not a creep. Story 3. A few years ago, my father nearly died from sepsis caused by alcohol abuse. After that, we moved him out of his home and into an assisted living center, and all of his belongings ended up stored in boxes in my garage. My parents divorced 15 years ago after my mom discovered paperwork from one of his rehab stays. On one of the worksheets, he admitted to having extramarital affairs throughout their 30-year marriage. Recently, I've been going through his things, throwing out whatever is expired or no longer needed. Among them, I found more worksheets from the same rehab program, one in particular listing all of his intimate encounters. Reading that was disturbing enough on its own, but I also learned that he had slept with my mom's best friend, Karen, her best friend since kindergarten, the maid of honor at their wedding, and still her closest friend to this day. My mom has no idea. She's a tender-hearted, saintly woman, and knowing this would devastate her. I've been torn over whether or not to tell her. I also came across needles and vials of naloxone, along with a flyer explaining how to use it during an opioid or heroin overdose. 5 of the 6 vials had already been used. I had no idea that during all the times he was in and out of rehab and claiming sobriety, he was actually using heroin, let alone overdosing multiple times. My brother already has enough on his plate, so for now, I'm keeping this to myself. Story 4. My neighbor has been secretly paying the rent for the elderly lady next door for 3 years. He'd be mortified if people knew because he's built his entire personality around being a grumpy curmudgeon. Story 5. My dad was in a coma during the final stages of cancer. I had helped my mom care for him several times, so I knew exactly how much morphine he was supposed to receive throughout the day. The hospice worker had already told us he didn't have much longer and that he would most likely never wake up again. On his last day, we all gathered around his bed to say our goodbyes. His breathing was labored, and his pulse was faint. My mom got out his morphine, but this time she measured out far more than his normal dose. My siblings didn't notice, but when she leaned over to give it to him, she and I locked eyes. She froze for a moment, and I gave a small nod. Then she gave him enough to finally let him go. Was it murder? I don't think so. He likely wouldn't have made it through the night even without it, and one of the last conversations he and I had before the coma was him asking me not to let him die in misery. In the end, I believe he would have wanted one of us to do exactly what we did. Story 6. My ex-fiance's degree hanging on her wall is fake, and I know because I made it. She did legitimately graduate from the same prestigious university I attended, but she had an outstanding balance for her student housing, so the school withheld her diploma. I thought that was ridiculous. So, with the help of a friend who worked at a print shop, we used my diploma as a template and made her one. If anyone ever looked closely, they'd notice the flaws. The font for her name doesn't quite match the originals, and the graduation date is wrong. She actually finished a year later. Story 7. I'll never let it go. I know what I heard that day, and I know it wasn't in my head. At the time, I think I heard my girlfriend going to town with her stepbrother upstairs in his room. She was supposedly getting ready in the bathroom upstairs, but as I was changing our daughter in the room downstairs, I heard noises from the room above, banging, rhythmic, that sped up and only stopped when their parents called for his name. I heard him respond, "Coming." Then came the snaps of clothes being pulled up quickly, followed by footsteps. I called her to see where she was. My mind racing a million miles an hour. She answered, and I could hear her voice from upstairs saying she was coming down. When she arrived, she refused to kiss me or hold me as I asked. I was falling apart in real time. I asked her to go on a walk with me, and she said she still had to get ready. Mind you, this was on Christmas with family there. I'm not trying to blow anything out of proportion. I can't prove anything. The only proof I had come about a year later when we were upstairs in her brother's room, and I happened to lean against his computer chair, which ended up making that same thud sound I had heard. Sigh. I don't know. Story 8. My best friend fell in love with and felt romantic attraction towards her biological father. She even kissed him once while he was drunk. Despite being a jobless substance addict, he was the one who ultimately had to cut off contact because she simply wouldn't let it go. For context, she was adopted as a baby and only met her biological parents for the first time at 18. From what I've since learned, it's not unheard of for family members who weren't raised together to experience this kind of attraction. On top of that, her adoptive father had the emotional depth of a stump, and she was still dealing with the trauma of having been raped in high school. She eventually graduated, built a successful career, and now has kids and a wonderful husband. As far as I can tell, he has no idea about her past. Story 9. I work as an ER nurse, and a friend once asked me to check in on their uncle, who had been rushed to the hospital. He's always had some health issues, so everyone assumed it was one of his usual problems. But when I checked the chart, I realized the real reason he was there was for having a foreign object being stuck where the sun doesn't shine. It even required surgery to remove. To this day, the whole family still believes it was just some random stomach problem. That secret, I'll be taking it to the grave. Story 10. I knew for a while that my boss was cheating on his wife. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't know her personally. And honestly, I've seen too many women take their anger out on the mistress instead of the man, even when she has no idea he's married. But then things changed. I became the target of harassment at work, and eventually I was told I was being demoted to part-time and moved to a location 50 miles away. The message was pretty clear: accept it or quit. So I quit, and then I reached out to his wife and told her everything. Story 11. About a year ago, a new family moved into the village, a couple and their 12-year-old daughter. The father looked to be in his late 30s, while the mother was closer to her late 50s. From the start, there was something a little off about the mother. She often seemed confused by simple things, like how her daughter would get to school. A few months ago, the truth came out. The father had previously worked as a carer at a nursing facility a few counties away. While there, he had an affair which led to her pregnancy. She had no family, and in an effort to keep the story out of the news, the facility allowed him to leave quietly. He moved away with her and the baby, and since then, they've been drifting from place to place. The daughter, now 12, is friends with my child, and she's a genuinely sweet kid. One day, she'll learn the truth about her parents. I just hope it doesn't happen until she's much older, when she has enough life experience and maturity to handle it. Story 12. When I was about 5, my mom's ex-boyfriend almost murdered her right in front of me. My parents were either in the middle of separating or early in their divorce. I'm not exactly sure. At the time, my mom and I were living with this guy, who also had an older son that I didn't know very well. One day, I was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor watching TV when my mom and her boyfriend got into a nasty fight in the kitchen, only about 10 feet away. Suddenly, my mom started yelling for me. When I looked over, he had her pinned with her back against the counter, holding a giant knife and screaming in her face. She shouted at me to go get help. I ran to the door and tried to unlock the top deadbolt, but I couldn't get it open. Maybe because I was panicking, or maybe because I was just 5 and didn't have the strength. All I could think was that if I didn't make it out to get a neighbor, I was going to watch my mom die right there in front of me. Calling 911 never even crossed my mind, and I don't know why she didn't yell for me to use the phone instead. Eventually, I managed to force the door open and sprinted down the breezeway toward the next apartment. But before I could make it to the neighbor's door, someone grabbed me from behind. It was my mom. He had apparently let her go, maybe realizing he was done for if I actually got help. She never called the police. I don't remember much about what happened after that. What I do remember is that not long after, my mom suddenly asked if I wanted to go live together with Daddy again. I was thrilled. During the separation, she had moved us in with 2 different boyfriends I barely knew and even forced me to lie to my dad about where we lived. I don't know if she ever told my dad what happened that day or if he knows at all, but they ended up reconciling and they're still together to this day. I still have warped nightmares about that moment. My mom being attacked with a knife while I desperately try to save her. We've never spoken about it since, and we never will because I know if I brought it up, she would deny it ever happened. Story 13. I know a guy, honestly one of the nicest people I've ever met, who once told me a story that still haunts me. Over 40 years ago, he knew a woman he described as the sister he never had. She had been essayed by mutual acquaintance, but when she went to the authorities, she didn't pursue prosecution and claimed she didn't know who had done it. My friend was the only person she confided in. He said he confronted the man, hoping he would turn himself in. Instead, the man insulted them both, blaming the woman and calling her names. My friend said something inside him snapped, and in a moment of rage, he attacked the man. He claimed the man died during the confrontation. According to him, he was never a suspect, and the police thought it was just a random incident. When the woman later asked him if he had done it, he said he lied to her, telling her he wished it had been him, but that he hadn't. He said he's never told anyone else this story and rarely thinks about it. But when he does, he feels no regret. Story 14. When I was younger, a mentally disabled woman worked at my school as an aide in the class my mom taught. She would sometimes tell us stories about her boyfriend. Over time, the stories became intimate in nature, and eventually she revealed that it was actually her neighbor who had instructed her to keep their relationship a secret. She had the body of an adult woman, but the mind not as quite mature for her age. That neighbor is now a well-known politician in our state, and his platform emphasizes being religious and serving God. I've asked my mom and sister, both supporters, if they ever think about how he was dating a mentally disabled person. Their response is always that God forgave him, so we should too, and that no one else needs to know. I often feel like I should tell people what happened, but I worry no one will believe me, and anyone else who knows is unlikely to speak up. Story 15. My stepbrother and his wife surrendered their only child at a fire station because the baby had a disability. They told everyone the child was stillborn. In reality, they didn't want to raise a special needs baby. As far as my father and his wife know, they don't have any grandchildren from their marriage, but somewhere out there, I have a step-sibling with Down syndrome who is now in the system. Edit. Since people are asking how this happened, this occurred in the U.S. We have something called safe haven laws. They vary by state, but generally they allow parents to safely surrender an infant at a hospital, fire station, or police station within a certain time frame, usually 30 days. Similar laws exist in other countries as well. Story 16. My father has always been very traditional and honestly quite homophobic. I came out as gay some years ago, and ever since, he's made it pretty clear that I don't fit into the future he imagines for the family. Recently, I found out he plans to leave the majority of his property and money to my nephew. His reasoning, according to him, at least he'll carry on the family name. What my father doesn't know is that my nephew is also gay. He just hasn't told anyone yet. Story 17. This story goes back many years in my family. My eldest brother is technically my half-brother. He never met his biological father. His dad went missing in Korea just 3 days before my brother was born, and to this day, the Air Force is still searching for his remains. A few years later, my mom remarried, the man I grew up calling Dad. I was born after that, But when my brother was around 3, my dad wanted to make things official and adopt him as his own. That's when everything came to a screeching halt. My brother's grandparents, his late father's parents, absolutely lost it. They threw a fit that shook the whole family. They threatened to disinherit him if the adoption went through or if his last name was changed because he was the very last male with their surname. You have to understand these grandparents were from that old-school, small-town landowning type of family. You know, the landed gentry of the cornfield sort of people. They had a sizable estate and a lot of pride tied up in their name. My parents were stuck. They didn't want my brother to lose his inheritance, so they gave in. The adoption never happened, but the grandparents were so offended that they cut off my mom completely, and she never tried to patch things up. As a result, I never even met them. Fast forward many years, life went on. My brother grew up, lived his own life, and here's the twist. He's gay. The grandparents have long since passed away, their precious legacy having gone exactly nowhere. Now my brother is leaving that very same farm to me. His husband passed away a few years ago. I miss him dearly. And the old family diamonds, they're mine now. It's a little petty, I won't lie. But after everything they put my mom through, there's something quietly satisfying about how it all turned out. Story 18. Over 35 years ago, I had a friend in Spain. He was Irish and had been smuggled out of Ireland to hide from crimes he'd committed. He once sent a car with a bomb into a military checkpoint, killing British soldiers. Another time, his car was found with bodies in the trunk. That's when he fled. He told me all of this about a year after I met him. He also shared stories from his childhood, British soldiers breaking down his front door and hitting his mom with rifle butts, and his brother being shot and killed by the British military. I never told anyone at the time. Years later, it became one of those travel stories I share with other Canadians. I sometimes wonder if he's still hiding out on Ibiza. Story 19. When I was in 7th grade, we got a new band teacher fresh out of college, probably about 22 or 23. I thought he was the coolest teacher I'd ever had. I absolutely idolized him. One day, I was at a mall with my parents, about an hour from our house, when I spotted him in Bath & Body Works. I immediately made a beeline to say hi. As an adult, I understand that teachers sometimes go out of their way to leave town so they don't run into students. I imagine that's what he was doing. We chatted for a minute or two, I was over the moon, and then went on my way. My parents noticed something I didn't. A man standing with him who quickly moved to another aisle as soon as they saw me coming. It was the 19s. He taught in a rural school district, and I imagine being openly gay could have been risky for his career. He was very good at keeping it under wraps. Years later, we connected on Facebook, and I casually mentioned to my parents that he had a boyfriend. They just smiled and said, "Yep, we've known since about 19." Story 20. My friend often talks about how her husband was homophobic when they first met, and how he's become more tolerant and accepting over the years after meeting her LGBT friends and realizing they're just regular people. What she doesn't know is that before they met, her husband had been bumping uglies with my openly bi husband. I only found out after they got married. Obviously, I can tell her without opening a huge can of worms. Her husband should have been honest from the start. I don't think the fact that he had experiences with men would faze her, but the deceit would. Story 21. Not necessarily disturbing, but definitely a secret. A few years ago, my dad needed help with his laptop. Somehow, the display cable inside had come loose. Not a big problem. Easy fix. When I turned it back on and loaded Windows, just to make sure everything was working, I was met with a window showing his Gmail sent messages. Every single one was him responding to M4M Craigslist ads. This was about a year after my mom had died. They had been married for 35 years, and as far back as I can remember, it was a pretty loveless marriage. I just closed the window, ran a Windows update, he's a boomer who never updates anything, and told him everything was good to go. I've only ever told my fiancé about it, and I don't plan to bring it up with my dad. He knows I'd be open and accepting. Both of my kids are part of the LGBTQ community, and it doesn't bother me, but I didn't think it was my place to initiate that conversation. Story 22. An individual I know is considered a prominent figure in a certain professional field and is somewhat well known within that field. They author, edit textbooks, publish extensive research, etc. They have a narrative included in every single biography you'll ever see about them that begins with their immigration to the US from a foreign country. They speak about this country and culture constantly, have a heavy accent associated with that country, use its slang/spelling pronunciations, and often express irritation with Americans and American culture. They even have a name that seems to fit the culture and is spelled accordingly, for example, Alexander instead of Alexander. I began noticing that when speaking to certain people, their accent was thicker than with others. They used slang constantly and were oddly rigid about only using spelling from their native culture. I did some online research and found not a scrap of information about them from before their supposed move to the US from this foreign country. Not even a school or athletic roster, not a mention in an obituary for a family member, etc. Given their age under 60, this seems strange. Then I wondered, could someone be so committed to the narrative of being from another country and culture that they would actually legally change their name? So I looked them up using the common American spelling of their name, and there they were. They were born and raised in the US, lived here until college, then went to undergraduate and graduate school in their native foreign country, less than 10 years. They returned to the US after obtaining their graduate degree and have been back for about 20 years. Out of their 50-plus years of life, they have spent 40-plus years as an American citizen. I know it's not uncommon for people to pick up accents or dialects, even in adulthood, when spending significant time somewhere, but the intensity of this person's accent, heavy use of slang, and focus on everything about them being from this culture seems quite intentional, as it has been maintained intensely for the 20 years since returning to the US. I'm fairly certain that if this became known in the wider community, this person's reputation and credibility would be questioned. It's such an odd thing to do, especially since it wasn't difficult for me to uncover. I'm actually surprised this hasn't come to light yet. However, the fact that they feel so strongly about this and put such effort into maintaining this identity seems to indicate a deeper internal struggle. I have no desire to make life harder for this person, and overall it's relatively harmless, so I've never told anyone. Story 23. My mother was a small-town model in the 1980s and somehow picked up a very serious stalker toward the end of her career. My father was a railroad worker and would often be out of town for 4 to 7 days at a time. Every time he left, the stalker would begin calling my mother on our house phone, sending her letters and packages in the mail, and leaving photos of us at our doorstep. He even called her on her birthday once. It was obvious that whoever was doing this was close enough to the family to know personal details, and when my father would be out of town, my mother was terrified, and the police simply did not take it seriously. So my dad arranged to go out of town for work, but then stayed behind and secretly watched the house from inside a friend's car parked across the street. On the second night of this, at around 4 a.m., sure enough, a shadowy figure emerged from the early morning fog and began poking around the windows and doors of our house. My father crept up on the man and apprehended him, dragging him to a nearby alley where the encounter ended in a tragedy. The man did not survive. He left him there in the alley. It was assumed he was an undocumented immigrant, and the incident remained unsolved. But afterward, the stalking stopped, and my mother never knew why. About 10 years later, on my great-grandfather's deathbed, he admitted to my father that he had been the one terrorizing my mother. He gave my father a key to a safe that contained all the evidence needed to prove he was the one stalking my mother, and there was no reason to believe he ever had any accomplices. Whoever was at our house that evening was not my mother's stalker, and my dad realized then that he had brutally murdered the wrong man. I'm the only person he ever told. Edit for clarity, this was already a long post, and I honestly didn't expect anyone to read it, so I may have over-edited. I don't know why the harassment against my mother suddenly stopped. My best guess is that the situation had reached a boiling point, and everyone in our family knew it was happening, so my great-grandfather decided to lay low. In 2022, my father had heart failure and almost died. When he could finally breathe on his own, he decided to dump a bunch of pretty disturbing stories on me. I may have gotten some of the details wrong, but it's a true story. I understand he didn't want to die with a secret like that, but I really wish he had never told me. He was gruff but loving, and we never knew him to be violent. I think about it every time I see my mother, and I wonder sometimes if I should tell her. Story 24. An old friend of a friend, let's call him Devon, cheated on his now wife and mother of his child with my ex. We had already been broken up for a while. My ex told me about it a couple of years later. A few years after that, I was heavily intoxicated at a party. I was on my way out of the friend group but decided to push my luck. I walked up to Devon and whispered in his ear, "I know you cheated on your current wife with my ex. Don't worry, I probably won't say anything." The pure fury in his eyes scared the living daylights out of me, but he didn't say a word. I never told his wife, and I don't talk to anyone from that circle anymore. Not really disturbing, but it still feels good to share. Story 25. My vegetarian friend once took me out for burgers. She ordered one chicken patty and one veggie patty, but the server mixed them up right in front of us. She kept eating, complaining that her burger was unusually chewy that day. She'd never had chicken before, so she had no idea what it actually tasted or felt like. The moment I bit into mine, I realized I had the veggie burger. By then, she had already taken a bite and swallowed hers. I knew she would get violently sick if I told her the truth and probably be devastated too, so I never said a word. It's been 14 years, and she still doesn't know she ate chicken that day. Story 26. I was essayed by an older stepbrother from one of my dad's previous marriages. There's a significant age gap between us, if you catch my drift. The only reason I haven't said anything is that I have no doubt my dad would legitimately off himself if he knew. For now, I'll be taking this to the grave. My parents had me young and divorced shortly afterward, but my dad always worked tirelessly to make sure I was happy and healthy. I can't even begin to imagine the mental devastation it would cause him, and I'm certain the rest of his family would explode, especially since I'm the only child in the family. Apparently, my ex-stepbrother is now a fairly successful physicist. I've been too consumed with making timelines of his potential other victims to keep up with his life. I'm pretending not to remember my own incident or know about the others until my dad passes away. If it comes down to it, I fully intend to take the truth with me and ensure justice in whatever way I can. Story 27. Growing up, I had a mother who the world adored. She was famous, celebrated, and everyone loved her work, but behind closed doors, she was completely different. She was controlling, manipulative, and ruthless to anyone she thought had wronged her. Her circle of friends, especially women, seemed drawn to her magnetically, but it was like being part of a revolving door. One day you could be her closest confidante, the next you could be cut off entirely, replaced by someone new. And if you ever stood up to her or disappointed her in any way, you paid the price. Publicly, she was loving, charming, and supportive. Privately, she was terrifying. She had a way of making people feel like they were constantly walking on eggshells, never knowing what would set her off. I learned early on that it was safer to stay silent, to keep my distance, and to protect myself. I don't talk about this publicly, not while she's alive, but one day when the time is right, I hope to tell my story fully. For now, I live with the knowledge of what it was like to grow up in her shadow, navigating a life where love and fear were so tightly intertwined. Story 28. This is ancient history now, but I once found out that my high school volleyball coach was a lesbian and that her sexual orientation may have inadvertently ended her coaching career at my rural high school. One weekend, I was visiting my divorced mom, who lived about an hour away. I stepped outside the house to do something and noticed my coach walking from her truck to the granny flat in the backyard, which was rented separately from my mom's house. She was with another woman. My mom didn't know the coach. She had divorced my dad and moved out a few years before the coach arrived in our small rural town. Mom had seen her around occasionally, but didn't know who she was until I told her. Mom was, and still is, very close-minded. Not long after, the coach announced she was moving away with little explanation. I suspect my mom may have called the high school and let them know about the coach's personal life. This was the rural Midwest in the mid-1980s, a place very intolerant of things like this. Story 29. This isn't the worst or most disturbing thing I know, but I understand the depth of pain it would cause my mother and sister. My dad was an atheist his entire life, Born in 1941 to immigrant parents, he grew up in a time and place where Christianity was expected, even in one of the most liberal areas of the U.S. He met my mom in the late 80s, early 90s and fell in love. She was a hardcore born-again Christian and wanted to raise us the same way. Dad participated in church activities multiple times a week, volunteered, donated, and worked on church projects. He even made friends with some of the husbands of my mom's girlfriends, so outwardly it appeared he was of the faith too. But he never really talked about it, preferring discussions about politics, medicine. He worked in open-heart surgery, family, the yard, tangible things. Mom was more of the eat, pray, love parent. Dad and I were thick as thieves. He was my mom's Prince Charming. Instead of going to the bar or staying late at work, he always came straight home. Mom was his best friend, and he genuinely enjoyed her company. When I was in my mid-30s and went from hardcore Christian to atheist, he was the first person I told. He was completely chill about it. I asked if he had ever been Christian, and after a brief hesitation, he said no, he had never believed in God. I was the only person he ever told, and he made me swear not to tell Mom. He died 6 months later from cancer. It took him so fast we didn't have much time to process it. I'm glad that of all the final conversations we had, his terminal diagnosis didn't taint this one. I will never tell my mom because her one hope in death is that she'll be reunited with him. Story 30. Many moons ago, during my senior year of high school, I discovered that my boyfriend's dad was cheating on his mom. He was a doctor and was sleeping with multiple nurses. I had no idea how to handle it. His whole family was composed of unhinged religious fanatics, and I wanted no part in the drama that such a discovery would inevitably bring. So I dumped my boyfriend of 3 years. I just noped the hell out. It was fine, he wasn't amazing, and his family was a nightmare, but sometimes I think about his dad and their severe judgmental attitude toward anyone who wasn't as godly as them. Because newsflash, no one is as pure and righteous as they think they are. I chuckle knowing just how full of it they were. Enjoy your house of lies. Story 31. My father was dating a woman, let's call her G, for more than 10 years, though they never lived together. He told me they had broken up, and for several years afterward, he casually dated other women, keeping me updated on his exploits. Last year, while he was traveling extensively, I got a phone call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be business-related, I answered. The person on the other end said, "Forever in black jeans. It's G, your dad's girlfriend. Do you know what's going on with him? We were supposed to have dinner last night, but he said he wasn't feeling well and was going to bed. I haven't been able to reach him and I'm worried sick." She had Googled me and found my work number. I told her he was out of the country, and though I wasn't sure who he was traveling with, I assumed it was another woman, since he said they had broken up years ago. It turns out he had been dating G the entire time. I thought they had broken up. At the same time, he was casually seeing at least 5 other women, and I later learned he was traveling with another woman he's actually living with. None of these women know about each other, and he has no idea this phone call ever happened, or that I know. If he ever finds out I told G anything, he would go nuclear and probably blame her for reaching out. I think she dumped him after this, but I'm not sure. Recently, I met his new partner for the first time and had to act normally, all while knowing he's been cheating on her the entire time she's lived with him. Story 32. Our village postman, now retired, was once caught on CCTV defecating in someone's gateway while out on his rounds. He had been caught short, and it was up a track and out of the way, but the area was under surveillance because there had been a lot of thefts. All of my colleagues and I watched the footage. It wasn't pleasant, but it was unmistakably him. We never mentioned it to anyone, and I guess to this day, the postman has no idea we all saw what he did. Story 33. I knew quite a few people in their 30s and 40s, business owners, executives, even a retired detective who were secretly struggling with opioids and sometimes other substances like alcohol or cocaine. Some of them managed it with medications like Subutex, keeping prescriptions private. They'd binge for a while, then use the medication to take a sort of rest, making sure their habits didn't completely spiral. Working from home or running your own business made it possible to maintain appearances while still getting work done. What really struck me was how easy it was for people around them to be fooled or even subconsciously choose to ignore warning signs. A late arrival here, seeming a little off there, or missing a minor detail, it often went unnoticed. As long as someone was seen as valuable or competent, the world tended to look the other way. I speak in the past tense because I cut ties with most of these people years ago and moved across the country. I don't know what they're doing now, but I suspect many continued living the same way for years. It's surprising to think that someone close to you could be leading a double life, hidden behind a carefully maintained appearance. But while some may appear to manage it, the risks of addiction are very real and the consequences long-lasting. Story 34. There was a guy at work near the end of a 35-year career, just a couple of months from retiring with an amazing pension. One Saturday, I went into the office to catch up on some work. His door was open, so I stopped in to say hi and see why he was working that weekend. Inexplicably, he was petting the one-eyed snake at his desk with the door open. I quickly tried to back out, but he saw me and panicked while trying to pull his pants up. I turned away and raised my arms as I left, as if signaling, "I'm pretending I didn't see that." I suppose I could have ruined his life by reporting it, but I didn't see the point. He avoided me after that. Understandably. Story 35. She's passed now, but I still keep her secret. My friend was very social and constantly had people over. When guests left their phones unattended, she would quickly copy as much as she could, their private messages, images, everything into a database on her computer. She even encouraged people to log into social media on her computer so she could copy and paste private conversations into documents when they left. She had people's private nudes in folders, among all sorts of other personal things. I don't know why she showed me this. I wasn't particularly close to her, but I guess she knew I wasn't judgmental. She wasn't malicious. She had cancer as a child and spent much of her life isolated, struggling to connect with people. I think it was a compulsion, a desperate need to understand others. It would have been catastrophic if I had told anyone. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. Even knowing all this, I once logged into Facebook on her computer and forgot to log out. That's on me. Story 36. I worked with a woman off and on over the years. We were friends at one point, but she was something else. She lied and cheated her way to success. At the rental office she managed, she'd park her car outside and go visit her daughter at college, 4 hours away while having an affair. When the guy came into the office, she sent me home on my first day there. Her daughter was born 9 months later. Her husband almost caught her. She survived cancer twice, and her daughter had leukemia at age 10. You'd think that would change her, but she got even worse. And yet she lives a nice life. A big home, a vacation trailer at the beach, fancy cars. She constantly makes fun of everyone who comes through the rental office door. She used to go to the bathroom and stink up the entire small office, then shrug and say, "Oh well, that's life," before leaving. One day, I actually sat her entitled ass down and gave her a 10-minute lecture on how to remove the smell after going to the bathroom. Candles, poopery, the whole thing. Her face was priceless. For a brief moment, she morphed into a little girl. Honestly, it's one of my favorite moments ever. She's something else. Some people truly are awful. Story 37. 13 years ago, I lived with someone who owned a real human skull. They also had replica fossil skulls and a Cyberman head, usually displayed on a bookshelf. There was no paperwork to verify any of it, and their story of how they acquired it sounded questionable. I reported it to Crime Stoppers years later, but at the time, getting away from them for other reasons took priority, so I didn't think much about it. I only fully realized the implications when I later told someone else about it. At one point, we moved house while I was living with them. We crossed the US-Canada border with the skull twice. Had Border Patrol discovered it, we could have been accused of murder, and there would have been serious charges for the other animal skulls, shells, and bones he'd brought. I didn't even know it was real until well after the move. I had assumed it was just plaster replicas. One day, a friend's wife casually mentioned they had it, and despite years of marriage, she had no idea where it came from. When he returned from a contract job, he told a story about how Chinese and Indian companies would rob graves and sell body parts in the US, and that the skull had no paperwork because it was illegal. Was that story true? I couldn't tell you, but several disturbing possibilities exist. 1. The story is true, and he knowingly participated in the illegal trade of human skulls, leaving a family somewhere unable to properly bury a relative. 2. He dug it out of a grave in the U.S. and was never caught for desecration. 3. He killed someone, processed the skull to make it look old, and got away with it. 4. He bought it from someone else who had done one of the above and accepted the story at face value. 5. He found it outside and rather than contacting authorities, decided to take it home. I'll never know which is true, but knowing he had it and how casually he treated it was deeply unsettling. Story 38. Not disturbing, but a secret was kept. A girl I know struggled academically. She failed 6th grade at a Christian college and never attended high school. Due to her difficult circumstances, she moved frequently between foster homes, spent time at Winlighton Juvenile Center for Girls, and even lived on the streets of Melbourne. Despite these challenges, she persevered. For her first job interview, she dressed professionally and, claiming to have completed her HSC, focused on her ambitions rather than her past. She never revealed the truth about her education. To her surprise, she landed the job. Over time, she advanced to a corporate account manager position, eventually managing the accounts of high-profile clients in the VIP prestige sector across Australia and New Zealand. Just one other coworker shared that responsibility. Remarkably, she had only passed 5th grade and still doesn't know her times tables. Eventually, she transitioned to another company where she became the national credit manager for all of Australia. Throughout her journey, she kept her past a secret, demonstrating that determination, confidence, and adaptability can open doors to success. But don't tell my boss. Story 39. A very elderly woman who lived nearby, nearing the end of her life, confided something shocking. She and her husband had taken their only child from a campground out west. Many years ago, the child's biological parents were camping next to them and had 6 other children they weren't closely watching. The camp hosts reportedly approached them the night before the family was leaving and said most of the other campers wished the couple would take the smallest child, as the older woman and her husband were unable to have children of their own. They raised him as their own. No one, not even the child, ever knew the truth. This was long before social security numbers and birth certificates were strictly tracked. Tragically, the child was killed at age 20, and her husband had already passed away. She had never told a soul and had since moved closer to the East Coast. She admitted she often wondered if his death was some form of cosmic punishment for taking him. Story 40. My mom was the primary caregiver for my grandma during her final year. Grandma passed away at home after years of illness. Her burial plot was next to her husband, multiple states away, where her other adult children lived. Mom didn't want to embalm the body and fly with it, so she pushed her siblings to allow cremation. Nobody was sure what Grandma's final wishes actually were. The other siblings were strongly opposed, but ultimately Mom got her way. She just needed a practical way to transport the remains for the funeral. My parents are notoriously disorganized. The day after the cremation, I stumbled across Grandma's final wishes in a folder. The first page, written in large block letters in Grandma's cursive, said, "No cremation." I showed my brother. We both put a finger to our lips and quite literally burned the paper in the fireplace. Mom and her siblings can never know. Story 41. I'm pretty sure my great-aunt and my grandma were actually half-sisters, not full sisters as they both believed. Both are dead now, but I discovered this when they were already elderly. It came up during a school history project where we had to write about someone in our family and tie it to a historical event. I chose my great-grandma, who emigrated from Norway to Canada with her oldest child while pregnant with my grandma, and lived on Vancouver Island for about 5 years while her husband was at sea. Then she abruptly returned to Oslo. She didn't have enough money for the full trip, but somehow convinced a famous Norwegian shipping mogul of the time to give her passage from New York to Oslo. Family lore says she went home to confront her alcoholic father and help her mother and sister. I noticed a discrepancy in her letters. Her sailor husband was away during the likely window of conception for her youngest child, my great-aunt, but she had a very close friendship with a married neighbor with kids. I'll never know for sure, but it seems suspicious. Story 42. Years ago, I was contacted by a man about a relative by marriage who was in the hospital. The man was married to my mom's aunt. He was 94 and passed away shortly after. His son, my mom's cousin, drove down, and I met him the day before the funeral. He was 56 at the time and seemed conflicted about his father's death. The father had always been distant and harsh, and they were never close. He had been very close with his mother, who had passed several years earlier. A few months later, my parents flew in from overseas, and the cousin came to meet them. The last time my mom had seen him, he was 8 years old. Later that week, my mom told me something shocking. Her aunt had previously been married to another man in Europe and had a child with him. That man died in the Holocaust while she was hidden in a monastery. After the war, she survived with the toddler, met another man, married him, and immigrated to the U.S. She never told her son that the man he grew up calling his father was not his biological parent. I almost yelled at my mom, "Why did you tell me this? Now I know, but he doesn't. He has no idea." I wrestled with whether it was my place to tell him and possibly relieve years of wondering why his father never loved him, or whether it was better to leave it alone. I never told him. Story 43. A person I know, my friend's ex-husband and his new wife claim they're trying to have a baby, at least that's what he says, and she doesn't correct him. He's almost 60, and she's in her late 30s. Both already have adult children. They met online and have no mutual connections. Here's the kicker. The wife had a complete hysterectomy 5 years before they started dating. So, unless her uterus magically regenerates, a baby isn't happening. Yet, she acts like she's about to pop out a child, and he's acting like becoming a dad again is the greatest thing ever. Meanwhile, he completely ignores the 3 kids he already has with my friend. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.